The White House. 5 African presidents accept Trump's invitation to discuss their continent's gold and minerals. One leader refuses to attend Ibrahim Traoré, and what he does, instead it will trigger the biggest resource confrontation between Africa and America in modern history. This is not about one meeting. This is about who controls $2.8 billion worth of African gold. And Traoré just made a move that has Washington scrambling for answers. In the world of global politics, an invitation to the White House isn't just a friendly chat. It's a summons. It's a carefully staged show of power, a flex meant to remind everyone, from allies to adversaries, who sits at the head of the global table. The manicured lawns, the grand columns, the weight of history in every room, it's all designed to project an aura of unshakable authority. So, when the United States invited a group of African leaders to Washington to talk about mining and critical minerals, the expectation was crystal clear. You show up. You take the photo op, you listen to the talking points about partnership, and you play ball, and 4 of them did. They got on their planes, flew thousands of miles to Washington, D.C., and played their designated part in the usual time-honored game of resource diplomacy. It's a game where Africa provides the raw materials, and the West sets the rules and reaps the rewards. But this time, one leader was missing. His chair was empty. He didn't just send his apologies or blame a sudden scheduling conflict. He just stayed home. This wasn't an oversight. It was a cold, calculated message delivered in silence. The silence was deafening. This is the story of Ibrahim Traoré, the young captain from Burkina Faso, who, after being pointedly excluded from the guest list of the powerful, decided he was done playing their game. Instead, he decided to take back his country's multi-billion-dollar gold industry. This isn't just another story about political defiance. It is a story about a new kind of African leader, one who is starting to spook the old colonial order. It's a story about a generation that read the history books, that understands the price of compliance, and is choosing a different path. This is the story of a revolution being forged not in speeches or political rallies, but in bars of solid gold. To understand why one man's absence from a summit could send such powerful shockwaves, you have to get it. You have to dig deep into the soil of Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation in the heart of West Africa, which holds a long, bitter, and painful memory of its immense resources serving distant masters. For over a century, its fate was never its own. First, it was the French Empire. At the turn of the 20th century, colonial administrators drew lines on a map, carved up a territory rich in gold and cotton, and renamed it Upper Volta. Its wealth and its people were systematically siphoned away to enrich a foreign capital. French companies built a vast system of extraction that was both brutal and wicked efficient. The gold flowed out, the cotton was shipped away, and in their place, deep-rooted poverty dug in, creating a cycle of dependency that would last for generations. Even after a flag of independence was raised in 1960, the old heavy chains of colonialism were simply replaced with the invisible shackles of neocolonialism. The most powerful symbol of this enduring control was the CFA franc, a currency system created by France and still controlled by the French treasury. Critics have long argued it was a financial architecture designed with one primary purpose: to ensure that wealth continued to flow out of its former African colonies and into Europe. This economic setup guaranteed that even when Burkinabe hands were the ones pulling gold from the ground, the profits, the real bag, would overwhelmingly benefit foreign companies and foreign banks. The nation was politically free, but economically it was still in chains. But Burkina Faso's history is not just a story of oppression. It's also a story of fierce, brilliant resistance. And no name embodies that resistance more than Thomas Sankara. In the 1980s, this fiery, charismatic, revolutionary captain took power and lit a fire of hope that spread across the entire continent. He immediately threw out the colonial name Upper Volta and renamed the country Burkina Faso, which means land of incorruptible people. Sankara wasn't just a politician. He was a visionary. He rejected the patronizing nature of foreign aid with the now famous words, "He who feeds you controls you." He nationalized the nation's land and mineral wealth, declaring that the riches under the soil belonged to the people, not to corporations in Paris or London. He launched mass vaccination campaigns that saved millions of lives and literacy programs that taught millions to read and write. In a move that was decades ahead of its time, he championed women's rights in ways the continent had never seen, banning forced marriages and appointing women to high-ranking government positions. Under his leadership, the country miraculously became food self-sufficient, a testament to his belief in the power of his own people. Sankara was a direct threat to the entire neo-colonial order. He proved that an African nation could stand on its own 2 feet, and for that he got taken out. In 1987, he was assassinated in a coup widely seen as being backed by foreign powers that feared his influence and the spread of his revolutionary ideas. His death cast a long, dark shadow over the nation, a brutal and chilling reminder of what happens when an African leader dares to dream of true, uncompromised sovereignty. It's this ghost, the ghost of Thomas Sankara, that haunts the presidency of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. When Traoré, another young, determined military officer, took power in a 2022 coup, he didn't just inherit a country fighting poverty and violent insurgents. He inherited a nation still grappling with this profound history. He inherited the unfulfilled promise of Sankara's revolution. He understood that the fight wasn't just about security on the ground. It was about dignity, about reclaiming the nation's soul. It was about finishing the revolution that Sankara had started. So the invitation to Washington wasn't just another diplomatic event. It was a choice. Take the well-worn path of compliance that leads to photo ops and dependency, or take the dangerous, uncertain, and revolutionary one that Sankara had forged decades before. The invitation from Washington, D.C. was wrapped in the familiar, chill language of partnership and cooperation. The United States, looking to secure its own supply of critical minerals for the 21st century economy, cherry-picked the leaders of several smaller African economies for a high-profile summit. It was a classic geopolitical move. Dangle the promise of aid, investment, and military support in exchange for privileged access to resources and friendly mining contracts. But the guest list was just as important for who it excluded. The leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, 3 nations in the Sahel region that had recently undergone coups and were actively pushing back against the old French-led order, were pointedly left off. It was a clear and unambiguous signal of Washington's disapproval, a diplomatic timeout for leaders who refused to get in line. But while other heads of state were posing for smiling photos in D.C., Ibrahim Traoré was quietly planning a summit of his own, not with foreign powers, but with his nation's future. He wasn't interested in begging for a slightly bigger piece of the pie from the international community. He was about to take over the whole damn bakery. His first move was a complete teardown of the laws that governed Burkina Faso's most valuable resource, gold. For years, the country's main export was mined under a system that was basically a giveaway for foreign corporations. The state held a measly 10% ownership stake in mining projects, a token share that allowed international companies to extract billions of dollars in wealth and repatriate the vast majority of the profits. For a country where gold accounts for a huge part of its exports, this wasn't just a bad deal. It was a total ripoff. In late 2023, Traoré's government torched the old rulebook by revising its mining code. The changes were swift, deep, and unapologetic. The new code paved the way for the state to demand a larger share in mining projects, moving beyond a flat rate and setting the stage for more aggressive state participation. But Traoré didn't stop there. He went right after the giants. In a move that sent shockwaves through the financial districts of London and Toronto, his government began acquiring key assets. It took control of 2 major gold mines, Bungu and Wagnion, which were previously held by the London-listed company Endeavour Mining. This wasn't a hostile takeover, but a strategic intervention. The government mediated a complex legal dispute between 2 foreign firms, and the resolution was that the state itself would acquire the mines. A decree was issued, formally transferring these mines and their licenses to a new, fully state-owned company called Sopamib. The message couldn't have been clearer. The era of foreign corporations operating with impunity is over. The state is in charge now. The reaction from the West was swift and predictable. Canada, home to many mining companies, protested. The U.S. State Department issued carefully worded statements of concern. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, began to issue stark warnings about scaring away foreign investors. These weren't friendly suggestions. They were straight-up threats. They were the same tools of economic and diplomatic pressure that had been used for decades to discipline defiant nations and keep them in line. But this time they weren't working. Traoré didn't even flinch. In fact, he was just getting started. What you are witnessing is more than just a series of policy changes in a faraway country. It is a tremor in the very foundation of the balance of power between Africa and the West. These are the kinds of stories that are often ignored by mainstream media, the stories of African self-determination that shake the pillars of the old economic order. If you believe these stories need to be told, and if you want to support content that documents Africa's rise, then take a second to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Your support helps us get these vital stories out to the world. Now let's get back to the climax of this incredible story. The pressure from Western capitals was becoming intense. Diplomatic phone lines between Ouagadougou, Paris, and Washington were buzzing with stern warnings. Global financial institutions, like the IMF and World Bank, began to wave the threat of cutting off investment and aid, a tactic designed to cripple a nation's economy before its revolution can even get off the ground. But Ibrahim Traoré understood something they didn't. Their power was derived from a system of rules and dependencies that he refused to recognize anymore. He was ready to raise the stakes. The knockout punch came in February 2024. The government announced an immediate and total suspension on the export of gold from all artisanal and small-scale mines. Officially, the reason given was to clean up the sector and cut off a major source of funding for smuggling groups and terrorists. But in reality, it was a test run for a much bigger, more audacious plan. It was Traoré testing his ability to turn off the tap. This was followed by an even more powerful declaration, a statement of intent that echoed the defiant spirit of Sankara. Traoré stood before his people and laid out a vision that went far beyond mining contracts. He spoke of achieving true monetary sovereignty. In a statement that resonated across the continent, he announced a new philosophy that would define his government. Our gold will back our currency, not theirs. This was the ultimate act of rebellion. It was a direct challenge to the entire global financial system that was set up after colonialism. For decades, African countries had been told to sell their tangible resources, their gold, their diamonds, their oil, in exchange for Western paper currency. They were told to store their national wealth in Western vaults and peg their own currencies to Western financial systems like the U.S. dollar or the euro. Traoré was now declaring that Burkina Faso's gold, real physical wealth pulled from its own soil, would no longer be sold off for paper. Instead, it would be held, preserved, and used as the foundation of its own economy. Then came an even bolder move, one that showed he was dead serious. A demand for the repatriation of all of Burkina Faso's gold reserves held in foreign banks. This was him demanding the keys to his own country's safe, a safe that had been held for decades in overseas vaults for protection and stability, but which was ultimately under the control of the very powers who profited from the arrangement. Suddenly, Washington, Paris, and London were stuck. Their old playbook was utterly useless. A military intervention against a popular leader was off the table. Harsh economic sanctions were now a huge gamble. They risked not only punishing the civilian population, but also pushing Burkina Faso and its newly allied neighbors, Mali and Niger, even further into the strategic arms of global rivals like Russia and China. The West found itself in checkmate. Traoré had used the undeniable, physical reality of gold to call their bluff on the abstract power of their currencies and financial systems. In doing so, he changed the game, not just for his country, but for any nation sitting on a treasure trove of natural resources and wondering if it, too, could dare to say no. The shockwaves from Traoré's stand didn't stop at Burkina Faso's borders. They rolled like thunder across the entire Sahel region. In the capitals of neighboring Mali and Niger, leaders who had also recently kicked out foreign troops and were sick of the old lopsided deals were watching, glued to their seats. They were feeling emboldened. This shared spirit of defiance led to the creation of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, in September 2023, a mutual defense and economic pact between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. This wasn't just another political club or talking shop. It was a bloc forged in resistance built on the principle of resource nationalism. Following Traoré's lead, both Mali and Niger began the process of reviewing and rewriting their own mining laws to give their states more control and a larger share of the profits. The once distant dream of revolutionaries, a Pan-African gold-backed currency, was now being seriously discussed as a real, tangible possibility for the AES. Traoré's defiance had become the playbook for liberation. Back home in Burkina Faso, the initial results of this newfound sovereignty started to become visible. With more revenue flowing directly into the state's coffers from the newly controlled mines, the government began to pump cash directly into social programs and strengthening national security. New schools and hospitals were funded. This wasn't just abstract economic policy. It was the difference between a child learning in a proper classroom or under a tree, between a sick patient receiving medicine or being turned away. But the most powerful and enduring symbol of this radical change was the launch of the country's first ever national gold refinery in November 2023. With a planned capacity to refine up to 150 tons of gold a year, this state-of-the-art facility was a declaration of industrial independence. For the first time in its history, Burkina Faso would be able to refine its own gold to 99.99% purity, capturing the most profitable part of the value chain right at home instead of exporting it. At the launch ceremony, Traoré laid out the new reality in simple, powerful terms. It will no longer be a question of us taking our gold outside to be refined. We refine it on site. We know what the real content of the raw gold that comes out is. That is very important. This refinery wasn't just a building. It was the physical manifestation of his entire philosophy: to transform Burkina Faso from a simple exporter of valuable dirt into a producer of pure, high-value bullion, stamped with the seal of a sovereign nation. This seismic shift is redrawing the world map. By demanding total economic independence and building new South-South alliances, the Sahel states are actively helping to forge a multipolar world, one that fundamentally challenges the decades-long dominance of the U.S. dollar and the Western-controlled financial system. This isn't just a local story. It is a preview of the future of the global economy, where African nations are no longer content to be pawns in a game they didn't create, but are finally and forcefully becoming players at the table. The story of Ibrahim Traoré and Burkina Faso's gold is about a line being drawn in the desert sand. On one side stands the old world order, a global financial system built on centuries of extraction, paternalism, and control. On the other side stands a new generation of African leaders, armed with a deep sense of history, a profound connection to their people, and an unbreakable will to be truly and completely sovereign. By effectively calling BS on the premise of Western-led summits, Traoré wasn't just snubbing a superpower. He was rejecting the deeply ingrained neo-colonial idea that Africa's wealth should be negotiated and managed in foreign capitals. By taking back his country's gold, he wasn't just nationalizing an industry. He was reclaiming a nation's soul, fulfilling the promise of independence that had been deferred for more than 60 years. He has proven to the world that a country's most valuable resource isn't the gold buried under its ground, but the courage of its leaders and the revolutionary spirit of its people. The West has been put on notice. The old patronizing language
of aid and partnership is being drowned out by the clear, unapologetic language of ownership and self-determination.
Ibrahim Traoré has revived the ghost of Thomas Sankara, proving to a new generation that the dream of a truly independent and self-reliant Africa never died. It was just waiting for a new generation with the guts to light it on fire. This is Africa Rising. The world is watching, certainly. But more importantly, Africa is watching. And for the first time in a long time, the question is no longer if the continent will one day reclaim its vast wealth, but who will be brave enough to stand in its way.